Imagine a quiet British street in the middle of the 1970s. The pavements are cracked in places. A Ford Cortina is parked slightly crooked along the curb. Somewhere down the road, a radio is playing through an open window, the sound drifting lazily through the warm afternoon air. You're about 8 years old. Your bike is lying in the grass where you dropped it 10 minutes ago. Your hands are sticky from a melted ice lolly, and suddenly, somewhere in the distance, you hear a familiar tune slowly echoing down the street, the ice cream van. You run inside, full of hope, but before you can even ask, your mum says the same thing every British mother seemed to say in those years. The music means he's run out. And for some reason, every single child believed it. Looking back now, the strange part isn't the lie. It's the fact that every family in Britain seemed to tell the exact same one. And that was just one of many strange little things about growing up in 1970s Britain that nobody ever questioned at the time. Number 2. Riding in the boot of the car. Safety rules were very different in the 1970s. If a family car was full and another child needed a lift home, there was an obvious solution. You simply put them in the boot. Not strapped in, not sitting properly, just curled up among the shopping bags or the spare tire, trying not to slide around too much when the car turned a corner. Children traveled this way for entire journeys, sometimes giggling, sometimes complaining that it smelled like petrol and damp carpet. At the time, nobody seemed particularly worried about it. It was just one more practical solution in an era when the phrase health and safety hadn't yet taken over everyday life. Number 3. Being sent to the shop with a note. Many children in the 1970s were trusted with responsibilities that sound slightly unbelievable today. One of the most common was being sent to the local shop with a handwritten note. The note might say something like, 20 Embassy Regal please. Folded neatly around a pound note, the message explained everything the shopkeeper needed to know. A child barely tall enough to see over the counter would hand it over, and without asking a single question, the shopkeeper would return with the cigarettes. The child would then walk home holding the packet like it was a loaf of bread or a pint of milk. Perfectly normal. Number 4. Collecting pop bottles for money. If you wanted pocket money in the 1970s, you had to earn it. And one of the easiest ways was collecting empty pop bottles. Glass bottles from drinks like Corona or Tizer carried a small deposit, usually a couple of pence. Children quickly realized that empty bottles could be found everywhere. Under park benches, in hedges, behind garages, along the edges of football fields. A Saturday morning might involve walking around the neighborhood with a carrier bag, collecting as many bottles as possible. Take them back to the shop, and suddenly you had enough coins for a quarter of sweets. For many children, it was their very first taste of earning money. Number 5. The weekly bath night. In many British homes, baths weren't taken every evening. Instead, there was a specific evening known simply as bath night, often Sunday. The bath would be run once, and then the children would go in one after the other, usually from youngest to oldest. By the time the last child climbed into the tub, the water had become noticeably grey. Nobody complained very much. It was simply the way things were done. Number 6. Recording songs off the radio. Before streaming, before playlists, and long before smartphones, capturing your favorite music required patience. Sunday afternoons often involved sitting beside a cassette recorder with your finger hovering nervously over the record button. You were waiting for your favorite song on Radio 1. If the timing was perfect, you might record the entire track, but usually, something went wrong. The DJ talked over the intro, someone slammed a door, or you pressed record a second too late. The cassette still went proudly into your collection anyway. Number 7. The Space Hopper. Few toys symbolized early 1970s childhood quite like the Space Hopper, a giant orange rubber ball with a smiling face and 2 ears to hold onto. The idea seemed simple. Sit on it and bounce down the pavement. In practice, it rarely went according to plan. Children bounced enthusiastically until the hopper tipped sideways and launched them straight onto the concrete. Almost every child fell off one at least once. Many fell off dozens of times, yet somehow the toy remained wildly popular. Number 8. The family telephone. Most homes had exactly one telephone. It was usually placed somewhere central, often in the hallway or on a small table in the living room. This meant every conversation was essentially public. If you were talking to a friend, your parents could hear every word. Sometimes your brother or sister would hover nearby, waiting impatiently for their turn, and the cord rarely stretched far enough to allow any privacy. Entire friendships were maintained under the watchful ears of the whole family. Number 9. Top of the Pops night. Thursday night meant one thing in millions of British homes: Top of the Pops. For many people, this was the only opportunity to actually see their favorite bands perform. Families gathered around the television while artists like ABBA, Slade, and David Bowie appeared on screen. Even parents who claimed not to like pop music often ended up watching anyway, because in the 1970s, television was something the whole family experienced together. Number 10. Perms on every dad. Towards the end of the decade, something very unusual happened across Britain. Men began getting perms. Footballers like Kevin Keegan helped popularize the look, but soon it spread everywhere. Bank managers had perms. Geography teachers had perms. Even dads who had never cared much about fashion suddenly appeared with tight curls. Looking back at family photos from the late 1970s can be quite surprising. An entire generation of British men briefly resembled prize-winning poodles, and nobody thought it looked strange. Number 11. White dog poo. For anyone who grew up in Britain during the 1970s, one sight was completely unavoidable: white dog poo. It appeared everywhere, on pavements, in parks, and sometimes right in the middle of a football pitch. Children stepped around it without giving it much thought. The color came from the dog food of the era, which contained large amounts of powdered bone and calcium. Once dried in the sun, the result turned pale and chalky. Today, it has almost completely disappeared, but in the 1970s, it was simply part of the scenery. Number 12. Clackers taking over the playground. Clackers were one of the most chaotic toy crazes of the decade. Two hard acrylic balls attached to a string. The goal was to swing them so they smashed together above and below your hand. When done properly, the sound echoed across the playground like rapid gunfire. The problem was that the balls sometimes shattered. Flying shards of plastic could send children home with bruised wrists or small cuts. Schools tried banning them. It didn't work for very long. Number 13. The terrifying public information films. Between television programs, British children were occasionally shown short safety films. These were meant to teach important lessons, but many of them were unexpectedly frightening. One of the most famous featured a dark hooded figure known as the Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water. He warned children about the dangers of ponds and reservoirs in a voice that sounded more like a villain from a horror film. Many viewers remembered these films long after the warnings themselves were forgotten. Number 14. Vinyl car seats in summer. Summer journeys in 1970s, cars came with one very uncomfortable feature: vinyl seats. When a car had been sitting in the sun for several hours, those seats became extremely hot. Children wearing shorts would sit down and immediately realize something had gone terribly wrong. Their legs would stick slightly to the seat surface. Peeling yourself off again made a slow, unmistakable sound. It happened every summer. Number 15. School dinner. Custard. School dinners in the 1970s had a reputation that many former pupils still remember clearly. Large trays of food sat under warm lights while children queued with metal trays. One particular item stood out: custard. It was thick, bright yellow, and almost always developed a skin across the top. Every child learned their own technique for avoiding that skin when pouring the custard onto pudding, because if the skin landed on your plate, it could ruin the entire dessert. Number 16. the 1976 heatwave. The summer of 1976 became legendary across Britain. For weeks, the country experienced intense heat and almost no rain. Grass turned brown, reservoirs dried up, and in some areas, water had to be rationed. Children, however, remember it slightly differently. To them, it was a summer of endless sunshine, long evenings outside, and ice lollies melting faster than they could be eaten. Number 17. Street parties for the Silver Jubilee. In 1977, Britain celebrated the Queen's Silver Jubilee. Across the country, streets were closed to traffic so neighbors could hold outdoor parties. Long tables appeared in the middle of residential roads. Bunting hung between lampposts. Paper plates carried sandwiches, cakes, and cups of orange squash. For many children, it was the first time the entire street seemed to come together for a celebration. Number 18. Disappearing all day. Perhaps the most surprising difference between childhood then and now was the level of freedom. Children often left the house in the morning and simply returned when it started getting dark. Parents rarely knew exactly where they were. They might be building dens in a field, playing football in a nearby park, or exploring places that would probably worry adults today. It was a childhood built on independence, and for many people who grew up in the 1970s, those long, unstructured days remain some of their happiest memories. If any of these moments took you straight back to childhood, let us know in the comments. And if you remember something from 1970s Britain that younger generations would never believe, share it below. Because sometimes the strangest things about the past are the ones we all accepted without even noticing.